All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well today. Today, we are going to read through Chapter 3 of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. If you're new to this, if you're new to these videos, I'm reading this live, and we are stopping and talking about interesting vocabulary words that maybe could be useful to you in your life as we read through, or explaining phrases or other things that maybe aren't so clear if you're learning English. So this is a good way to deepen your level and understanding of English if you're a pretty advanced student. If you are watching this live with me, then I encourage you to ask questions in the chat. If you ask questions in the chat and I see it, I will be happy to talk about any words or phrases that you find interesting. So let's get started with Chapter 3 of The Great Gatsby. There was music from my neighbor's house through the summer nights. In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whispering and champagne and the stars. A high tide in the afternoon, I watched his guests diving from the tower of his raft or taking the sun on the hot sand of his beach, while his two motorboats slit the waters of the Sound. You know, the word slit, it means like a small opening. Slit, slot, I don't even know if there's a difference between a slit. But when you think of a slit, you can think of, let's see, what kind of pictures. I might get in trouble if we look at pictures of slits. Well, I'm surprised that the first thing, or the main thing that you see when you look for a picture of a slit, whoops, where'd it go? Is this kind of dress where you can see the leg. That's called a slit in a dress. And it seems to be the only thing that they're showing. But slits can be a lot of different things. It just means like a small opening. A long and skinny opening is a slit. So when he says that the motorboat slit the water, you can picture the water going and then a small skinny line that's kind of separating two spaces of water. Two motorboats slit the waters of the Sound, drawing aquaplanes over cataracts of foam. On weekends, his Rolls-Royce became an ominous. Ominous means... well, let's check the definition of that. It means something that's kind of, to me, scary. Let's see. Giving the impression that something bad or unpleasant is going to happen, threatening or inauspicious. So seeing his Rolls-Royce drive around made you feel like something bad was about to happen. Let's see if he explains that more. Because so far, nobody has said anything bad about him, like he's done anything bad. I don't know why he should feel afraid. On weekends, his Rolls-Royce became an omnibus bearing parties to and from the city. Oh, an omnibus. No, I misread that word. Omnibus. That's an old word for bus. That's all that means. Omnibus. Okay, his Rolls-Royce became an omnibus. It became like a bus. taking guests to and from the city. Between 9 in the morning and long past midnight, while his station wagon scampered like a brisk yellow bug to meet all trains. And on Mondays, 8 servants, including an extra gardener, toiled all day with mops and scrubbing brushes and hammers and garden shears, repairing the ravages of the night before. Toil means to work very hard. So if his servants were toiling, they were working very hard. And it seems like they had many servants they had these parties, and then in the morning the servants had to clean and repair any kind of damage that happened. N is saying, what is scamper? That's a good question. Scamper, to me it seems like small quick movements, or like running around, but let's see what the official definition is. Let's see. Scamper. To move in a hurry. To move in a hurry. Let's reread that part. On weekends, his Rolls-Royce became an omnibus, bearing parties to and from the city between 9 in the morning and long past midnight, while the station wagon scampered like a brisk yellow bug to meet all the trains. So you could see his station wagon, that's like a big car, going very quickly to and from the train station, bringing guests from the train station to his home, or bringing guests from his home to the train station to return to the city. And on Mondays, 8 servants, including an extra gardener, toiled all day with mops and scrubbing brushes and hammers and garden shears, repairing the ravages of the night before. Every Friday, 5 crates of oranges and lemons arrived from the fruiterer in New York. Every Monday, these same oranges and lemons left his back door in a pyramid of pulpless halves. There was a machine in the kitchen which could extract the juice of 200 oranges in half an hour, if a little button was pressed 200 times by a butler's thumb. At least once a fortnight, a corps of caterers came down with several 100 feet of canvas and enough colored lights to make a Christmas tree of Gatsby's enormous garden. On buffet tables, garnished with glistening hors d'oeuvre, spiced baked hams, crowded against salads of harlequin designs and pastry pigs and turkeys bewitched to a dark gold. In the main hall, a bar with a real brass rail was set up and stocked with gins and liquors and with cordials so long forgotten that most of his female guests were too young to know one from another. By 7 o'clock, the orchestra has arrived. No thin 5-piece affair, but a whole pitful of oboes and trombones and saxophones and viols and cornets and piccolos and low and high drums. The last swimmers have come in from the beach and now are dressing upstairs, and the cars from New York are parked 5 deep in the drive, and already the halls and salons and verandas are gaudy with primary colors. Gaudy means like, it means like bad taste, something that's kind of ugly. Let's look at some pictures of gaudy. I wonder what kind of pictures we'll get. Probably it's the name of a character or something for sale, so we won't actually see pictures of what gaudy means. We'll just see products. But let's see. If someone dresses in a gaudy manner, they usually use a lot of colors. It doesn't really look very nice. Well, maybe the person who's wearing it thinks it looks nice. But, like, for example, look at this car. Some people probably like that. But other people will say, oh, that's too colorful, that's too much. And you would say it's gaudy, which what we would understand from that is it's so decorated that it's ugly. I don't like it. Look at this car. What do you think about this car? That's pretty gaudy. Some people will like it. That's a gaudy sofa. It's too much. It's decorated too much. So maybe a way to think of gaudy is too much decoration. So much decoration that it becomes ugly. Let me just readjust things. Okay. The bar is in full swing and floating rounds of cocktails permeate the garden outside until the air is alive with chatter and laughter, casual innuendo, and introductions forgotten on the spot. When you say that something is on the spot, we've seen that word before, or that phrase, on the spot. That means right at that place, right at that moment. So when it says introductions were forgotten on the spot, that would be like, Mike, this is John. John, this is Mike. Oh, nice to meet you. But then immediately they forget the names and the people. They don't care. That happens. They're forgotten on the spot, right at that moment. And enthusiastic meetings between women who never knew each other's names. The lights grow brighter as the earth lurches away from the sun, and now the orchestra is playing full yellow cocktail music, and the opera voices pitches a key higher. Laughter is easier, minute by minute, spilled. What is that word? What? Let me see. Prodigitally. Let's see. Prodigitally. There's no definition for it. Well, I wonder if it's related to the word prodigious. Let's see what prodigious means. Remarkable, impressive. Let's see if that fits. The lights grew brighter, the earth lurches away from the sun, and now the orchestra is playing yellow cocktail music, and the opera of voices pitches a key higher. Laughter is easier, minute by minute, spilled with prodigality. I don't know. I just don't know what that word could mean. Impressive? Impressiveness? Maybe it means impressiveness. That kind of fits here. I guess we'll have to go with that. I mean, Google doesn't even define that word. They give the name of a company. I guess it's the name of some company. Tipped out at a cheerful word. The groups change more swiftly, swell with new arrivals, dissolve and form in the same breath. Already there are wanderers, confident girls who weave here and there among the stouter, more stable, become for a sharp... Let me read that again. Confident girls who weave here and there, the stouter and more stable, become for a sharp, joyous moment, the center of a group. N says it's the act of spending too much money. I think you're thinking of prodigal. And I'm not sure if those words are related. And I'm not sure if that would make sense, because he's talking about music playing, or the sound of the music, which doesn't really have anything to do with money. But I think you're thinking of the word prodigal. Joyous moment, the center of a group, and then excited with triumph. Glide on through the sea change of faces and voices and color under the constantly changing light. N says prodigality is explained. So you found the definition. I couldn't find it. Prodigality. When I check prodigality, wait, maybe I spelled it wrong. Prodigality. Oh, I must have spelled it wrong. Okay, I apologize. I must have spelled it wrong when I was looking when I looked it up the first time, and it just gave me the name of a company, and I said, "Oh, what is that?" So prodigality. So it must be prodigality. That must be the way that you pronounce it. Do they have the pronunciation here? Let's see. Let's try to get the pronunciation. Not that it's important. You would never use this word. I think if you use that word, yeah, prodigality. Okay. If you use that word, people will say, "What? What are you talking about?" So you don't have... I wouldn't recommend using it. Suddenly, one of these gypsies in trembling opal seizes a cocktail out of the air, dumps it down for courage, and moving her hands like Frisco, dances out alone on the canvas platform. A momentary hush. The orchestra leader varies his rhythm obligingly for her, and there is a burst of chatter as the erroneous news goes around that she's Gilda Gray's understudy from the Follies. The party has begun. I believe that on the first night I went to Gatsby's house, I was one of the few guests who had actually been invited. People were not invited. They went there. They got into automobiles which bore them out to Long Island, and somehow they ended up at Gatsby's door. Once they were introduced by someone who knew Gatsby, and after that they conducted themselves according to the rules of behavior associated with amusement. Sometimes they came and went without having met Gatsby at all. Came for the party with a simplicity of heart that was its own ticket of admission. Yeah, N is asking, erroneous is wrong. Yeah, what would be maybe the difference between wrong and erroneous is maybe if you're doing something in an erroneous way, it means you think it's right, but it's actually wrong. Whereas wrong could just mean not correct. I don't even remember reading that word, erroneous. Where is it? How did they use it? Erroneous news goes around that so they're spreading a rumor. People think that she has a certain type of job, but they're wrong. They're wrong about that. They think they're right, but they're wrong. So it's erroneous news. I believe that on the first night I went to Gatsby's house, I was one of the few guests who had actually been invited. People were not invited. They went there. They got into automobiles which bore them out to Long Island, and somehow they ended up at Gatsby's door. Once there, they were introduced by somebody who knew Gatsby, and after that, they conducted themselves according to the rules of behavior associated with amusement parks. Sometimes they came and went without having met Gatsby at all. Came for the party with a simplicity of heart that was its own ticket of admission. I had actually been invited, a chauffeur in a uniform of robin's egg blue, crossed my lawn early that Saturday morning with a surprisingly formal note from his employer. The honor would be entirely Gatsby's, it said, if I would attend his little party that night. He had seen me several times and had intended to call on me long before, but a peculiar combination of circumstances had prevented it. Signed, J. Gatsby, in a majestic hand. Majestic kind of means like a king or a god. And hand refers to the style that he writes. So he has a very beautiful way of writing. Dressed up. Robin, N is asking about a robin. A robin is I don't know where you live, N, but a robin is a very common type of bird around here in North America. And do you have birds like this where you live? These are robins. And robins, when they make eggs, they're a very beautiful blue color. Here are some robin's eggs. So isn't that interesting? Have you ever seen that before? So this is called robin's egg blue. This is the color. It's like a light blue color. And so he's saying that the chauffeur came from his employer's home in a robin's egg blue suit. So he was wearing a suit, and it was this color, robin's egg blue. Dressed up in white flannels, I went over his lawn a little after 7 and wandered around, rather ill at ease. To be ill at ease means to feel uncomfortable. So he was very uncomfortable. Among the swirls and eddies of people I didn't know. So he was uncomfortable because there were many people there and he didn't know anybody. Though here and there was a face I had noticed on the commuting train, I was immediately struck by the number of young Englishmen dotted about, all well-dressed, all looking a little hungry, and all talking in low, earnest voices to solid and prosperous Americans. I was sure that they were selling something, bonds or insurance or automobiles. They were at least agonizingly aware of the easy money in the vicinity and convinced that it was theirs for a few words in the right key. Oh, N is asking about dot around. Where was that? Went over ill at ease among the swirls and eddies of people I didn't know, though here I noticed a few. Where was it? It must be in this paragraph, right? Ill at ease among the swirls and eddies of people I didn't know. Let's read it again, and then I'll stop when I find it, because it must be in this paragraph. Dressed up in white flannels, I went over to his lawn a little after 7 and wandered around rather ill at ease among the swirls and eddies of people I didn't know, though here and there was a face I had noticed on the commuting train. I was immediately struck by the number of young Englishmen dotted about. Okay, let's see. I was doing a class yesterday, and we were talking about... What was the word that we were using? Let's see. I can't remember. But what happened when we looked up this word was we... Oh, I'll try to show you. Okay. A dot is like a little circle. Whoops. That's annoying. You click on images and then they play videos. That's horrible. Google is getting worse and worse every single day, I swear. Okay. A dot's like a little circle. So if you look at a graph like this, like .com, you have your john@gmail.com. Dot is that little point, that little circle. So if you can imagine things are dotted around, you could imagine, or dotted about, either way. Same thing. It doesn't mean anything different. You could just imagine like very irregular groups and placed all over everywhere. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I understand from dotted about. As soon as I arrived, I made an attempt to find my host, but the 2 or 3 people of whom I asked his whereabouts stared at me in such an amazed way and denied so vehemently any knowledge of his movements that I slunk off. Slunking is when you kind of lean over, like maybe when you're ashamed or embarrassed. So you go away like this, kind of ashamed or embarrassed. Oh no, I've gone blurry. Okay, we're all right. I slunk off in the direction of the cocktail table, the only place in the garden where a single man could linger without looking purposeless and alone. Vehemently, N is asking about the word vehemently. To be vehement means to be very confident, very sure about something, to do something strongly and very surely. Let's look up the official definition of that. Forceful, passionate, or intense. So he's saying, where's Gatsby? And people say, I don't know. They say it very strongly, very, very sure, so that it would be to avoid asking any more questions about it. Are you sure you don't know? So in order to avoid that kind of questioning, they say, I don't know, very strongly, very vehemently. When you're vehement about something, you're very passionate and very strong about it. I was on my way to getting roaring drunk from sheer embarrassment when Jordan Baker came out of the house and stood at the head of the marble steps, leaning a little backward and looking with contemptuous interest down into the garden. And contempt means hate. So he's looking down at the garden. He's interested, but in a hateful way. Welcome or not, I found it necessary to attach myself to someone before I should begin to address cordial remarks to passers-by. Hello, I roared, advancing toward her. My voice seemed unnaturally loud across the garden. I thought you might be here, she responded absently as I came up. I remember you lived next door. She held my hand impersonally as a promise that she'd take care of me in a minute and gave her ear to 2 girls in twin yellow dresses who stopped at the foot of the steps. Hello, they cried together. Sorry you didn't win. That was for the golf tournament. She had lost in the finals the week before. You don't know who we are, said one of the girls in yellow, but we met you here about a month ago. You've dyed your hair since then, remarked Jordan. And I started, but the girls had moved casually on her remark. And I started, but the girls had moved casually on and her remark was addressed to the premature moon, produced, like the supper, no doubt, out of the caterer's basket. With Jordan's slender golden arm resting in mine, we descended the steps and sauntered about the garden. A tray of cocktails floated at us. Got to reposition this. A tray of cocktails floated at us through the twilight, and we sat down at a table with the 2 girls in yellow and 3 men, each one introduced to us as Mr. Mumble. So mumbling is like it's like somebody is talking but you can't understand what they're saying because they're not speaking clearly enough or they're not speaking loudly enough. So each of these men was introduced as Mr. Mumble, which means probably this is Mr. So he never really heard their names, I think. I think that's what he's saying. Or it didn't matter. Do you come to these parties often? Inquired Jordan of the girl beside her. The last one was the one I met you at, answered the girl. In an alert, confident voice, she turned to her companion. Wasn't it for you, Lucille? It was for Lucille, too. I like to come, said Lucille. I never care what I do, so I always have a good time. When I was here last, I tore my gown on a chair, and he asked me my name and address. Inside of a week, I got a package from Croyer's, I can't say that name, with a new evening gown in it. Did you keep it? Asked Jordan. Sure I did. I was going to wear it tonight, but it was too big in the bust and had to be altered. It was gas blue with lavender beads. $265. There's something funny about that fellow that'll do a thing like that, said the other girl eagerly. He doesn't want any trouble with anybody. Who doesn't? I inquired. Gatsby. Somebody told me. The 2 girls and Jordan leaned together confidentially. Confidential means secret, so they're about to share a secret with Nick. They lean in like they're about to tell a secret. They lean in confidentially. Somebody told me that they thought he killed a man once. A thrill passed over all of us. The 3 Mr. Mumbles bent forward and listened eagerly. I don't think it's so much that, argued Lucille skeptically. It's more that he was a German spy during the war. One of the men nodded confidently. Nodded in confirmation. I heard that from a man who knew all about him, grew up with him in Germany. He assured us positively. Oh, no, said the first girl. It couldn't be that. Because he was in the American army during the war. By the way, they're talking about World War I. They're not talking about World War II. As our credulity switched back to her, she leaned forward with enthusiasm. You look at him sometimes when he thinks nobody's looking at him. I'll bet he killed a man. She narrowed her eyes and shivered. Lucille shivered. Shivering is, ooh. Lucille shivered. We all turned and looked around for Gatsby. It was a testimony to the romantic speculation he inspired, that there were whispers about him from those who found little that it was necessary to whisper about in this world. So, I guess he's a pretty mysterious man, and it seems like people who have nothing interesting happen in their lives love to make up gossip and rumors about him. The first supper, there would be another, one after midnight, was now being served, and Jordan invited me to join her own party, who were spread around the table on the other side of the garden. There were 3 married couples and Jordan's escort, a persistent undergraduate given to violent innuendo, and obviously under the impression that sooner or later Jordan was going to yield to him upon her person to a greater or lesser degree. So she's got an escort, which means like a date, maybe not a boyfriend, but just someone to go with her to the party. But this guy seems to think that he can maybe marry her one day, I think is what he's saying here. He seems confident about that. Yield means to... how can you explain yield? Yield means like to let someone have the power, to let someone have the movement. So if you yield to someone, this girl, she seems very uninterested in everything and everyone. So she doesn't seem like the type of person who would be very interested in marrying someone or falling in love. She has this strong personality, but he thinks that she will yield to him, like she will suddenly give up her power to him, which I think means in this case that maybe one day she will marry him. N is asking about innuendo. And innuendo is like saying something without saying anything, without saying what you're thinking. Oh, let's check the official definition of innuendo. I'm no good at definitions. Maybe if I keep doing this forever, then I'll become an expert at giving definitions of words. A hint, an insinuation, an intimation. So, Imagine we're about to go to a restaurant, and I don't like what you're wearing. I think it's not appropriate for the restaurant. But I don't want to tell you that I don't like your clothes and I think you should change before we go. So I might start saying things like, this is a very formal, expensive restaurant where everybody dresses very nicely. So I'm not telling you directly to change your clothes, but I'm trying to lead you in that direction. And when it is, N says, oh, it's like implication. It is kind of like implication, yes. So how did they use it here? Jordan's escort, a persistent undergraduate given to violent innuendo. When someone is given to something, it means it's their habit, it's their routine. So violent innuendo means he's doing things like that, like, oh, this is a very nice restaurant. And people dress very nicely, but he does it in a violent way. It's obvious he's telling you something and it isn't very nice, but he does it in a way where you can't really say that he's a bad person because he doesn't directly say. It's like passive-aggressive aggression, if that makes any sense at all. Instead of rambling, this party had preserved a dignified homogeneity and assumed itself the function of representing the staid nobility of the countryside, East Egg, condescending to West Egg, and carefully on guard against the spectroscopic gaiety. A backward compliment. I'm trying to think about, like, what is a backward compliment? Like, oh, you've lost weight. Well, that's good. I don't know, like really kind of implying the person is fat. Yeah, kind of like that. I guess you're right. Like a backward compliment. So he's that kind of person who says things that they're nice words, but the way he says them and the force with which he says them, it's really not very nice. "Let's get out," whispered Jordan after a somehow wasteful and inappropriate half hour. "This is much too polite for me." We got up, and she explained that we were going to find the host. I had never met him, she said, and it was making me uneasy. The undergraduate nodded in a cynical, melancholy way. The bar where we first glanced was crowded, but Gatsby was not there. She couldn't find him on top of the steps, and he wasn't in the veranda. On a chance, we tried an important-looking door and walked into a high Gothic library, paneled with carved English oak, and probably transported complete from some ruin overseas. A stout, middle-aged man with enormous owl spectacles was sitting somewhat drunk on the edge of a great table, staring with unsteady concentration at the shelves of books. As we entered, he wheeled excitedly around the examined. Let me read that again. As we entered, he wheeled excitedly around and examined Jordan from head to foot. "What do you think?" he demanded impetuously. "About what?" He waved his hand around the bookshelves. "About that. As a matter of fact, you needn't bother ascertain as I ascertained. They're real." "The books?" He nodded. "Absolutely real. Have pages and everything. I thought they'd be a nice, durable cardboard. Matter of fact, they're absolutely real. Pages and... Here, let me show you." Taking our skepticism for granted, he rushed to the bookcase and returned with a volume of the Stoddard Lectures. "See?" he cried triumphantly. "It's a bona fide piece of printed matter. It fooled me. This fellow's a regular Belasco. It's a triumph. What thoroughness! What realism! Knew when to stop, too. Didn't cut the pages. But what do you want? What do you expect?" So this man is impressed because Gatsby has this giant library in his home, and the books are real. I didn't know that they made fake books. I didn't know that they made fake books now. I didn't know that they made fake books in the 1920s to decorate a library. That's crazy. He snatched the book from me and replaced it hastily on the shelf, muttering that if one brick was removed, the whole library was liable to collapse. "Who brought you?" he demanded. "Or did you just come?" "I was brought. Most people were brought." Jordan looked at him alertly, cheerfully, without answering. "I was brought by a woman named Roosevelt," he continued. "Mrs. Claude Roosevelt. Do you know her?" "I met her somewhere last night. I've been drunk for about a week now, and I thought it might sober me up to sit in the library. Has it? A little bit, I think. I can't tell you. I've only been here an hour. Did I tell you about the books? They're real. Yeah, you told us." We shook hands with him gravely and went back outdoors. There was dancing now, on the canvas in the garden. Old men pushing young girls backward in eternal, graceless circles. Superior couples holding each other tortuously, fashionably. And says, "What's bona fide?" Bona fide means real, authentic. Well, let me check. Let me just make sure. In good faith. Bona fide in good faith. When applied to business deals, sincerity. Yeah, I mean, it just means earnest. It just means authentic here. There was dancing now on the canvas in the garden, old men pushing young girls backwards in eternal, graceless circles, superior couples holding each other tortuously, fashionably, and keeping in the corners, and a great number of single girls dancing individualistically or relieving the orchestra for a moment of the burden of the banjo or the traps. By midnight, the hilarity had increased. A celebrated tenor had sung in Italian, and a notorious contralto had sung in jazz. And between the numbers of people were doing stunts all over the garden, while happy, vacuous bursts of laughter rose toward the summer sky. A pair of stage twins, who turned out to be the girls in yellow, did a baby act in costume, and champagne was served in glasses bigger than finger bowls. The man had risen higher. The moon had risen higher, and floating in the sound was a triangle of silver scales, trembling a little to the stiff, tinny drip of the banjos on the lawn. I was still with Jordan Baker. We were sitting at a table with a man of about my age, and a rowdy little girl who gave way upon the slightest provocation to uncontrollable laughter. I was enjoying myself now. I had taken 2 finger bowls of champagne, and the scene had changed before my eyes into something significant, elemental, and profound. At a lull in the entertainment, the man looked at me and smiled. "Your face is familiar," he said politely. "Weren't you in the 3rd Division during the war?" "Why, yes. I was in the 9th Machine Gun Battalion. I was in the 7th Infantry until 1918. I knew I'd seen you somewhere before. We talked for a moment about some wet, gray little villages in France. Evidently he lived in this vicinity, for he told me that he had just bought a hydroplane and was going to try it out in the morning. Whenever you see the word hydro, that has something to do with water. So a hydroplane is a plane that can land on the water, land or take off on the water. Let's take a look at a hydroplane. Wow, I guess I'm old because when I think of a hydroplane, these look very fancy to me. I haven't seen any planes like this. Or, wait a minute. Did I spell plane the wrong way? No, I did. I spelled it the correct way. I think this is showing me the wrong kind of hydroplane. Let's see. Waterplane. I think this is what he's talking about. Whoops. Waterplane. He's talking about this. The word hydroplane means something else too. It means floating on water, kind of like a boat. But that would be like if you're driving a car and there was some rain and the road is wet, and if you lose control of your car, it's because of because plane can mean like surface, like a flat surface. So hydroplaning can also mean moving on a flat, watery surface. So if you're driving your car on the road and you lose control because of the water, that's called hydroplaning. But I don't think that's what they meant here. They meant that he bought a plane that can land on the water or take off on the water. N is asking about vicinity. Vicinity means nearby. Nearby. We talked for a moment about some wet great village in France. Evidently, he lived in this vicinity for he told me that he had just bought a hydroplane. So he lives in this vicinity means he lives nearby. He lives around here. Kai Pan says, good morning. Good morning, Kai Pan. How are you doing today? Thank you for joining us. And he was going to try out his hydroplane this morning. Want to go with me, old sport? Just near the shore along the Sound. What time? Any time that suits you best. It was on the tip of my tongue to ask him his name when Jordan looked around and smiled. Having a gay time now? She inquired. Much better. I turned again to my new acquaintance. This is an unusual party for me. I haven't even seen the host. I live over there. I waved my hand at the invisible hedge in the distance, and this man, Gatsby, sent over his chauffeur with an invitation. For a moment he looked at me as if he failed to understand. I'm Gatsby, he said. What? I exclaimed. Oh, I beg your pardon. I thought you knew, old sport. I'm afraid I'm not a very good host. He smiled understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in a life. It faced, or seemed to face, the whole external world for an instant, and when concentrated on you, with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. I understood you just so far as you wanted to be understood. It understood you just so far as you wanted to be understood. Believed in you as you would like to believe in yourself. And assured you that it had precisely the impression of you that at your best you hoped to convey. Precisely at the point it vanished, and it was looking at an elegant young roughneck, a year or two over 30, whose elaborate formality of speech just missed being absurd. Some time before he introduced himself, I got a strong impression that he was picking his words with care. Almost at the moment when Mr. Gatsby identified himself, a butler hurried toward him with information that Chicago was calling him on the wire. He excused himself with a small bow that included each of us in turn. If you want anything, just ask for it, old sport, he urged. Excuse me, I'll rejoin you later. When he was gone, I turned immediately to Jordan, constrained to assure her of my surprise. I had expected that Mr. Gatsby would be a florid and corpulent person in his middle years. Corpulent. Let's look up that word, corpulent. Fat. So he was expecting a middle-aged fat guy. Who is he? I demanded. Do you know? He's just a man named Gatsby. Where's he from, I mean, and what does he do? Now you've started on the subject, she answered with a wan smile. Well, he told me once he was an Oxford man. Anne is asking about the word florid. I don't even remember seeing that word. Where did it go? Well, let's look. I don't know. Let's look at the word florid. Well, I learned so many new words doing this myself. And it's funny because, you know, when you do a Google search and then you've already done it, you get the thing that you were searching for in purple or blue. And I always forget these words because we've looked up this word before. I can see when I type florid meaning, I've already done this, but I can't remember what it means. Having a red or flushed complexion. So if you're florid, that means your skin is very red. Maybe if you're, I guess if that's your complexion, you always have that. It isn't temporary. Oh, it was with corpulent? Mr. Gatsby would be a florid and corpulent person. You know, if people drink a lot of alcohol, their skin turns red. Like their cheeks will turn red and their nose will turn red. And so when he says, oh, I imagine Mr. Gatsby to be a florid and corpulent person, he would picture a very red face because this is a very rich man, always having parties, probably always drinking. So he should have very red skin, and he should be fat. A dim background started to take shape behind him, but at her next remark it faded away. However, I don't believe it. What? Believe what? Wait, he told me once he was an Oxford man. So he told me that he went to Oxford. I don't know, she insisted. I just don't think he went there. Something in her tone reminded me of the other girls. I think he killed a man and had the effect of stimulating my curiosity. I would have accepted without question the information that Gatsby sprang from the swamps of Louisiana or from the Lower East Side of New York. That was comprehensible, but young men didn't. At least in my provincial experience, I believed, they didn't drift coolly out of nowhere and buy a place on Long Island Sound. Anyhow, he gives large parties, said Jordan, changing the subject with an urbane distaste for the concrete. And I like large parties. They're so intimate. At small parties, there isn't any privacy. There was a boom of bass drum, and the voices of the orchestra leader rang out suddenly above the echolalia of the garden. Ladies and gentlemen, he cried at the request of Mr. Gatsby, we are going to play for you Mr. Vladimir Tostof's latest work, which attracted so much attention at Carnegie Hall last May. If you read the papers, you know there was a big sensation. He smiled with a jovial condescension and added some sensation, whereupon everybody laughed. The piece is known, he concluded lustily, as Vladimir Tostof's Jazz History of the World. The nature of Mr. Tostof's composition eluded me, because just as it began, my eyes fell on Gatsby, standing alone on the marble steps and looking from one group to another with approving eyes. His tanned skin was drawn attractively tight on his face, and his short hair looked as though it were trimmed every day. I could see nothing sinister about him. I wondered if the fact that he was not drinking helped to set him off from his guests. For if it seemed to me that he had grew more correct as the fraternal hilarity increased. When the jazz history of the world was over, the girls were putting their heads on men's shoulders in a puppyish, convivial way. Girls were swooning backward playfully into men's arms, even into groups, knowing that someone would arrest their falls. But no one swooned backward on Gatsby, and no French bob touched Gatsby's shoulders, and no singing quartets were formed with Gatsby's head for one link. I beg your pardon. Gatsby's butler was suddenly standing beside us. Miss Baker, he inquired, I beg your pardon, but Mr. Gatsby would like to speak to you alone. With me? She exclaimed in surprise. Yes, madam. She got up slowly, raising her eyebrows at me in astonishment, and followed the butler toward the house. I noticed that she wore her evening dress, all her dresses, like sports clothes. Anne is asking about butler. In the past, maybe even now, very rich people will have different types of servants. Maids do cleaning, and usually maids will do cleaning, and there are different kinds of maids. But a butler is a man, and usually he does things like answer the door, answer the phone, serve things like serve drinks or serve dinner. And it's one of the more important jobs in the house of a rich person is the butler. That's like the person in charge of everything, responsible for everything in the house, all of the arrangements in the house. So he's kind of like the boss of the lower servants. With the jauntiness about her movements, as if she had first learned to walk upon golf courses on clean, crisp mornings. I was alone, and it was almost 2. For some time confused and intriguing sounds had issued from along many windowed rooms which overhung the terrace, eluding Jordan's undergraduate, who was now engaged in an obstetrical conversation with 2 chorus girls, and who implored me to join him. I went inside. A large room was full of people. One of the girls in yellow was playing the piano, and beside her stood a tall, red-haired young lady from a famous chorus engaged in song. She had drunk a quantity of champagne, and during the course of her song she had decided ineptly that everything was very, very sad. She was not only singing, she was weeping too. Weeping is a type of crying. Loud crying. That's weeping. Whenever there was a pause in the song, she filled it with gasping, broken sobs. Sobbing, again, is a type of crying. That's upsetting my dogs when I do that. N is asking about the word inept. To me, inept means like... I just want to think of a definition before I check the real definition, just to see if I'm right. I'm probably wrong. But inept means like not qualified, or... God, there's this word, I can't think of it. Incompetent. Incompetent. Not very good. Let's see. Having no skill. Being clumsy. Kai Pan says, like ineptitude. Yes, well, inept is an adjective. He is inept at his job. That means he's not very skilled. He's not very good at his job. But ineptitude is a noun. It's the noun form. So I was amazed by his ineptitude. She was not only singing, she was weeping too. Whenever there was a pause in the song, she filled it with gasping, broken sobs, and then took up the lyric again in a quavering soprano. The tears coursed down her cheeks. Not freely, however, for when they came into contact with her heavily beaded eyelashes, they assumed an inky color and pursued the rest of their way in slow black rivulets. A humorous suggestion was made that she sing the notes on her face, whereupon she threw up her hands, sank into a chair, and went off into a deep, vinous sleep. She had a fight with a man who says he's her husband, explained a girl at my elbow. I looked around. Most of the remaining women were now having fights with men said to be their husbands. Even Jordan's party, a quartet from East Egg, were rent asunder by dissension. One of the men was talking with curious intensity to a young actress, and his wife, after attempting to laugh at the situation in a dignified and indifferent way, broke down entirely and restored to flank attacks. At intervals, she appeared suddenly at his side like an angry diamond and hissed, "You promised," into his ear. This reluctance to go home was not confined to wayward men. Wayward means no place to go. Let me just check the meaning of that. Wayward. Oh, difficult to control or predict because of unusual or perverse behavior. I was totally wrong about that. Difficult to control or predict because of unusual or perverse behavior. Anne is asking about flank. Flank is like either side, side to side. A flank is the side of something. But let me just check. I have to make sure. I don't trust my definitions. Let's see. The side of a person's, the right side or left side of something. The reluctance to go home was not confined to wayward men, so men difficult to control. The hall was at present occupied by two deplorably sober men and their highly indignant wives. So sober is the opposite of drunk. So these two men were sober, but their wives were very angry for some reason. The wives were sympathizing with each other in slightly raised voices. Whenever he sees I'm having a good time, he wants to go home. Never heard anything so selfish in my life. We're always the first ones to leave. So are we. Well, we're almost the last tonight, said one of the men sheepishly. The orchestra left half an hour ago. In spite of the wives' agreement that such malevolence was beyond credibility, the dispute ended in a short struggle, and both wives were lifted kicking into the night. As I waited for my hat in the hall, the door of the library opened, and Jordan Baker and Gatsby came out together. He was saying some last word to her, but the eagerness in his manner tightened abruptly into formality as several people approached him to say goodbye. Jordan's party were calling impatiently to her from the porch, and she lingered for a moment to shake hands. "I've just heard the most amazing thing," she whispered. "How long were you in there?" "Why, about an hour." "It was simply amazing," she repeated abstractedly. "But I swore I wouldn't tell, and here I am tantalizing you." She yawned gracefully in my face. "Please come and see me. Phone book, under the name Miss Sigourney Howard, my aunt." She was hurrying off. As she talked, her brown hand waved a jaunty salute as she melted into her party at the door. Rather ashamed that on my first appearance I had stayed so late, I joined the last of Gatsby's guests, who were clustered around him. I wanted to explain that I'd hunted for him in the evening to apologize for not having known him in the garden. "Don't mention it," he enjoined me eagerly. "Don't give it another thought, old sport." The familiar expression held no more familiarity than the hand which reassuringly brushed my shoulder. "And don't forget, we're going up in the hydroplane tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Then the butler behind his shoulder. Philadelphia wants you on the phone, sir. All right, in a minute. Tell them I'll be right there. Good night. Good night. He smiled. And suddenly there seemed to be a pleasant significance in having been among the last to go, as if he had desired it all the time. Good night, old sport. Good night. But as I walked down the steps, I saw that the evening was not quite over. 50 feet from the door, a dozen headlights illuminated a bizarre and tumultuous scene. In the ditch beside the road, right side up, but violently shorn of one wheel, rested a new coupe, which had left Gatsby's drive not 2 minutes before. The sharp jut of a wall accounted for the detachment of the wheel, which was now getting considerable attention from half a dozen curious chauffeurs. However, as they had left their cars blocking the road, a harsh, discordant din from the house in the rear had been audible for some time, and added to the already violent confusion of the scene. I'm not sure what's happening here. In the ditch. A ditch is... Let's take a look at what a ditch is. A ditch is something like this. A ditch in the road would be something like this here. This is a ditch. It's sort of like a hole. That's a ditch. Here's a ditch with some water. A drainage ditch. See, and I think what they're describing, I'm not sure, we have to read this again, but why can't I show this to you? Oh no. The way Google does things now really annoys me. Have I mentioned that recently? It's maybe something like this. This is not the picture that I wanted to show you, but I think they're describing a car in a ditch. In the ditch beside the road, right side up, but violently shorn of one wheel, rested a new coupe. A coupe is a type of car, which had left Gatsby's drive not 2 minutes before. So maybe somebody really drunk tried to drive away from the house, and then the car went into a ditch. Burak, as seen, says hello. Hello, Burak. Thank you for joining us today. The sharp jut of a wall accounted for the detachment of the wheel, which was now getting considerable attention from half a dozen curious chauffeurs. However, as they had left their cars blocking the road, a harsh, discordant din from those in the rear had been audible for some time and added to the already violent confusion of the scene. A man in a long duster had dismounted from the wreck. A wreck is like a disaster. Like if a car crashes and the car is ruined, you would call that car a wreck. And now stood in the middle of the road, looking from the car to the tire and from the tire to the observers in a pleasant, puzzled way. Puzzled means confused. What happened? See, he explained, it went into the ditch. The fact was infinitely astonishing to him, and recognized first the unusual quality of wonder, and then the man. It was the late patron of Gatsby's library. So remember, this man that they met in the library has been drunk for a week. And then he tried to drive his car. I know nothing whatever about mechanics, he said decisively. But how did it happen? Did you run into the wall? Don't ask me, said Owl Eyes, washing his hands of the whole matter. I know very little about driving, next to nothing. It happened, and that's all I know. Well, if you're a poor driver, you oughtn't try driving at night. But I wasn't even trying, he explained indignantly. I wasn't even trying. An awed hush fell upon the bystanders. Do you want to commit suicide? You're lucky it was just a wheel. A bad driver, and not even trying? You don't understand, explained the criminal. I wasn't driving. There's another man in the car. The shock that followed this declaration found voice in the sustained as the door of the coupe swung slowly open. The crowd, it was now a crowd, stepped back involuntarily, and when the door had opened wide, there was a ghostly pause. Then, very gradually, part by part, a pale, dangling individual stepped out of the wreck, pawing. People, humans, have hands and feet, but animals have paws. P-A-W. So, humans have 2 hands and 4 feet. 4 feet. Humans have 2 hands and 2 feet. Animals have 4 paws. And when you paw at something, that's like what an animal would do with their paws. This is pawing at something. Not grabbing, not using your hands, but doing this motion. Something like this with all of your hands, like the way an animal would do something. N is asking about the word indignant. Indignant means like anger. When you're angry because someone has insulted you or offended you or done something bad to you, and you feel like someone deserves anger, then so it's a type of anger when someone has offended you. I don't remember where that was used. So he has this car accident, and they say, well, you shouldn't be driving if you don't know how to drive. And he gets angry, like, what do you mean? I wasn't driving. You think it was me? He's kind of angry about that. That's why he says, I wasn't even trying, indignantly. I wasn't even trying. There was a ghostly pause, and then very gradually, part by part, a pale, dangling individual stepped out of the wreck, pawing tentatively at the ground with a large, uncertain dancing shoe. Blinded by the glare of the headlights and confused by the incessant groaning of the horns, the apparition stood, swaying for a moment before he perceived the man in the duster. What's the matter? He inquired calmly. Did we run out of gas? Look. Half a dozen fingers pointed at the amputated wheel, and he stared as if for a moment and then looked upward as though he suspected it had dropped from the sky. It came off, someone explained. He nodded. At first I didn't notice we stopped. A pause. Then, taking a long breath and straightening his shoulders, he remarked in a determined voice, Wonder if he'll tell me where there's a certain gas line station. I'm trying to sound drunk. I don't know if it's working. At least a dozen men, because they're writing it like he's drunk. At first, a dozen men, some of them a little better off than he was, explained to him that the wheel and car were no longer joined by any physical bond. Back out, he suggested after a moment. Put her in reverse. But the wheels went off. He hesitated. No harm in trying. The caterwauling horns had reached a crescendo, and I turned away and cut across the lawn towards home. I glanced back once. A wafer of a moon was shining over Gatsby's house, making the night fine as before, and surviving the laughter and the sound of his still glowing garden. A sudden emptiness seemed to flow now from the windows and the great doors, endowing with complete isolation the figure of the host, who stood on the porch, his hand up in a formal gesture of farewell. Reading over what I have written so far, I see I've given the impression that the events of 3 nights, several weeks apart were all that absorbed me. On the contrary, they were merely casual events in a crowded summer, and until much later they absorbed me infinitely less than my personal affairs. So he's writing about this incident, but he's saying those actually were not, that's not really what was happening in my life. I'm just telling you about some very insignificant events in my life. Actually, a lot of other things were happening in my life at that time. Most of the time I worked. In the early morning, the sun threw my shadow westward as I hurried down the white chasms of lower New York to the Probity Trust. I knew the other clerks and the young bond salesmen by their first names and lunched with them in dark, crowded restaurants on little pig sausages and mashed potatoes and coffee. I even had a short affair with a girl who lived in Jersey City and worked in the accounting department. But her brother began throwing back mean looks in my direction, so when she went on her vacation in July, I let it blow quietly away. I took dinner usually at the Yale Club. For some reason it was the gloomiest event of my day, and then I went upstairs to the library and studied investments and securities for a conscientious hour. There were generally few rioters around, but they never came into the library, so it was a good place to work after that, if the night was mellow. Mellow means calm, soft, not very hard. So that means if the night was quiet, nice weather. I strolled down Madison Avenue past the old Murray Hill Hotel, over 33rd Street to Pennsylvania Station. I began to like New York, the racy, adventurous feel of it at night, and the satisfaction that the constant flicker of men and women and machines gives to the restless eye. I like to walk up Fifth Avenue and pick out romantic women from a crowd and imagine that in a few minutes I was going to enter into their lives, and no one would ever know or disapprove. Sometimes in my mind I followed them to their apartments on the corners of hidden streets, and they turned and smiled back at me before they faded through the door into a warm darkness. At the enchanted metropolitan twilight, I felt a haunting loneliness sometimes, and felt it in others, poor young clerks who loitered in front of windows, waiting until it was time for a solitary restaurant dinner, young clerks in the dusk, wasting the most poignant moments of night and life. Again at 8 o'clock, when the dark lanes of the 40s were 5 deep with throbbing taxis, bound for the theater district, I felt a sinking in my heart. When you feel a sinking in your heart, it means like you start to feel sad or scared or something, or disappointed. Forms leaned together in the taxis as they waited, and voices sang, and there was laughter from unheard jokes, and lighted cigarettes outlined unintelligible gestures inside, imagining that I too was hurrying towards gaiety and sharing their intimate excitement. I wished them well. For a while, I lost sight of Jordan Baker, and then in midsummer I found her again. At first, I was flattered to go to places with her because she was a golf champion, and everyone knew her name. And then it was something more. I wasn't actually in love, but I felt a sort of tender curiosity. The bored, haughty face that she turned to the world concealed something. More affectations conceal something eventually. Most affectations conceal something eventually, even though they don't in the beginning. And one day I found out what it was. When we were on a house party together up in Warwick, she left a borrowed car out in the rain with the top down, then lied about it, and suddenly I remembered a story about her that had eluded me that night at Daisy's. At her first big golf tournament, there was a row that nearly reached the newspapers. A row is like a fight. A suggestion that she had moved her ball from a bad lie in the semifinal round. The thing approached the proportions of a scandal and then died away. So I don't know anything about golf, but it seems like she's cheating. So she's a famous female golfer, but at the very last tournament, people accused her of cheating, moving her ball. I don't know where or how, because I don't know anything about golf, but it seems like she's a liar and a cheater because she borrowed someone's car. A few weeks ago, she borrowed someone's car. It was a convertible. She left the top down and it rained, so it ruined the car. And she lied about it. And then he remembered an incident earlier in the summer when people were accusing her of cheating, of moving the ball closer to the goal when no one was looking, or something like that. A caddy retracted his statement. A caddy is the person who carries the golf equipment. So maybe the caddy saw her cheat and he told people about it, but then when it became well known, he said, "Oh, I was lying. I take that back. When you retract something, you take it back." A caddy retracted his statement, and the only other witness admitted that he might have been mistaken. The incident and the name had remained together in my mind. Jordan Baker instinctively avoided clever, shrewd men, and now I saw this was because she felt safer on a plane where any divergence from a code would be thought impossible. So it seems like she surrounds herself with stupid people who will never notice that she's a liar and a cheater, and she avoids smart men or smart people because they will see through her. What he talks about affectations. Affectations is like fake behavior, phony behavior. And so she stays with simple people who aren't too smart, because they never notice anything besides her affectations, her phony behavior. But smarter, cleverer people would notice that. She was incurably dishonest. She wasn't able to endure being at a disadvantage, and given this unwillingness, I suppose that she had begun dealing in subterfuges when she was very young in order to keep that cool, insolent smile turned to the world and yet satisfy the demands of her hard, jaunty body. It made no difference to me. Dishonesty in a woman is a thing you never blame deeply. I was casually sorry, and then I forgot. It was on the same house party that we had a curious conversation about driving a car. It started because she passed so close to some workmen on our fender flicked a button on one of the men's coats. "You rotten driver," I protested. "Either you ought to be more careful or you oughtn't drive at all." "I am careful. You're not." "Well, other people are," she said lightly. What's that got to do with it? They'll keep out of my way, she insisted. It takes two to make an accident. Suppose you met someone just as careless as yourself. I hope I never will, she answered. I hate careless people. That's why I like you. Her gray, sun-strained eyes stared straight ahead, but she had deliberately shifted our relations, and for a moment I thought I loved her. But I am slow-thinking and full of interior rules, and that act as brakes on my desires, and I knew that first I had to get myself definitely out of that tangle back home. I'd been writing letters once a week and signing them Love Nick. And all I could think of was how, when that certain girl played tennis, a faint mustache of perspiration appeared on her upper lip. Nevertheless, there was a vague understanding that had to be tactfully broken off before I was free. Everyone suspects himself of at least one of the cardinal virtues, and this is mine. I am one of the few honest people that I have ever known. All right, well, that was Chapter 3 of The Great Gatsby. So next time, I think tomorrow, let me check. Check the old schedule. Yes. Tomorrow I can read Chapter 4 at the same time. So I will see everyone tomorrow. I hope you come back tomorrow for Chapter 4 of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Thank you for everyone who stayed and thank you for all of your questions. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Goodbye.